you.
Thank you, Mr. Lakhani. Right at the onset, I would like to thank the scientific committee of the AIOS and Dr. Partha for having all of us here. Without wasting much time, I'll straight away go into the proceedings of today's IC. We all know that cataract surgery over the years has become more of a refractive procedure than purely a vision restoring procedure. So what's most important in the cataract surgery is that we need to be absolutely accurate as far as our IOL power calculation. Hitting the target power bang on with biometry is in itself a challenge. The problem seems even more daunting when it comes to eyes with various pathologies. What we have done here today is have accumulated a group of speakers who are specialists, who are experts in their own field. We have with us Dr. Anand Parthasarathy, who is a corneal and refractive surgeon. We have with us Dr. Rinkul Pusate, who is a pediatric ophthalmologist, but who's managing the cataract and the refractive work at Dr. Babankule's clinic, which is a retinal center. We have Dr. Chandrasekhar Vavikar, who is a cataract and refractive surgeon. We have Dr. Shilpa Kodkani from Belgaum, who is also a cataract and refractive surgeon. Before wasting much time, let me go to the first speaker, and we'll start off with Dr. Anand Parthasarathy.
Nitin. Sir, Dr. Anand is not with us right now.
Nitin, Anand is requested coming third or fourth.
So we can
start with the second speaker.
Okay.
Yeah, we can.
So let's start off. Let's start off with the first talk. We'll shift to Dr. We'll just change the order. So let me introduce Dr. Vavikar, who actually requires no introduction. Dr. Vavikar is the director of the Vavikar Eye Hospital at Thane, Mumbai. He was amongst the first in the country to use and revolutionize the Lensex, that is the FLACS, that is femtosecond laser assisted cataract surgery. His basic interest is in the IOL power calculation. He's been speaking about this topic at various forums. He's got, to his credit, his own IOL power calculation software, which has been released at the AIOS in Jaipur, if I mistake not. So without wasting much time, let me go to Dr. Vavikar, who will be telling us how does one do an IOL power calculation in ectatic cornea. Over to you, Dr. Vavikar.
I hope you can hear me. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. So good morning, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Nitin, for those kind words. I'm going to talk on IOL power calculation in corneal ectasia. No financial interest, of course. Now, if we see such cases, they can be broadly divided into 5 categories with the level of difficulty I have written on the right hand side. If you see keratoconus, keratoglobus, and PMD, that is level 1. When we have done something to the keratoconus, like topo-guided procedure or Intex or CPR, it becomes level 2. And post-laxative ectasia becomes level 2. Whereas post-laxative ectasia with some procedure done on top, it becomes difficulty level 3. There are many difficulties getting good K reading. Anterior posterior ratio of the corneal curvature is altered, which is normally typically 0.82. And prior refractive surgery complicates the matter because the AP ratio gets altered twice. Prior Intex or topo-guided PRK probably simplifies the matter because the cornea becomes smoother, regular, and we are able to take K readings and make some sense for the central topo. Then because of all this, you can get a false ACD and difficult to predict estimated lens position. So before deciding about the spherical power, we must decide about the toric IOL, whether to go ahead with the toric IOL or not. For that, the first prerequisite is that the central 3 millimeter of the topo has to be fairly regular, and there have to be repeatable, reproducible, consistent key readings on at least 2 machines, preferably 3 machines. Okay. Then we try to understand the new retics classification, which I will explain on the next slide. And 4th point is debulking the astigmatism. So once you have decided with toric IOL, it is important to tell the patient that we are not going to get rid of the total astigmatism, but we are going to significantly reduce it. Now, previous classifications of keratoconus are based basically on the topography. However, that is not a very good idea because the functionality, quality of vision is not considered. Retics classification includes all this. So besides topo, it also considers the best corrected visual acuity, the K readings, astigmatism in diopters, of course, and the higher order aberrations that are in the RMS, in the microns, and the Q value. So with all this, we are able to fairly understand how good the quality of the vision of the patient is. And as you go from grade 1 to grade 4 plus, the quality of the vision deteriorates. Now here is an example, a patient of best corrected visual acuity of 0.98 and a stable refraction of minus 4.5 diopter sphere and minus 4 cylinder. We were able to consistently get K readings on this patient. So this was the Retics classification 1. Mind you, on topo this looks like a big keratoconus, but on Retics this is grade 1, and we got a favorable result by doing toric IOL. Now, when it comes to spherical IOL, let us divide the Retics into further 2 parts: Retics grade 1 and 2, and Retics 3 and above. Retics grade 1 and 2, the calculations are comparatively simple, and therefore we have got only 3 choices. Number 1, for those who have pentacam, use regression formula with EKR 6.5 and a refractive index of 1.3375. Of course, the K readings have to be reproducible, which I already explained first. Holiday 2 is the best suited for EKR, but if you don't have Holiday 2, Holiday 1 will also work. And most of the people have access to Holiday 1, but you can try all this in SRKT also. Of course, this is not scientifically proven up till now. Then the second approach is Barrett approach. So there are 3 ways we can go. 2 ways we can go. Number 1 is Barrett through K and Barrett through K TK with swept source OCT. Barrett through K TK, I do not have a personal experience up till now. My machine has not been upgraded to this. The third is ray tracing, but enough data is not available for us to say that this method is very good. And therefore, using regression formula with the EKR of 6.5 and Holiday 1, that is one method. And second is Barrett through K method, using taking the help of AAPS website. You will get 2 readings and you can choose either the average or the best, whatever you feel the best. Now, Barrett through K, there is one important point is that we have to choose the measured posterior corneal astigmatism, not the estimated posterior corneal astigmatism. So we are feeding the anterior and then we also feed the posterior. It will do vector summation and find out what is the net vector. And we also have to use refractive index of 1.3375. Barrett typically gives you 2 options. Out of that, we have to choose refractive index of 1.3375. This is a paper which illustrates that when refractive surgery, prior to refractive surgery, what is the power of the patient plus measured PCA. If they are fed into the calculator, Barrett through K performs better. Over here, there is no question of feeding in the prior refractive error, but if you feed in measured PCA, certainly it gives a very good result. Then Barrett through K TK, I do not have experience as I already said. But Barrett through K TK improves the predictability of the refractive outcome by almost 12%, which is a huge jump compared to the kind of difficulties we are having up till now. So you see that this is a difficult topic and uncharted area up till now, but slowly we are finding solutions to this. Then we go to IOL power calculation for Retics grade 3 and above. Now there are points here. Number one is that we have novel choices, and second is we have got conservative choices. So novel choices, the first novel choice is a two-step approach, where first you do cornea smoothing procedure by either doing intacs or topography, depending upon the topography maps of the patient, which will convert hopefully the ratings of the keratoconus from grade 3 or 4 to grade 1 or 2. And then we take the approach which has been explained in the previous slides. Here, C3R may not be necessary if the cornea is sufficiently thick and the patient is 65-year-old, because keratoconus is very unlikely to progress. Then we think of CEOZ. That is the second novel approach. This is a very unique approach, but not easy to follow. CEOZ stands for Central Effective Optical Zone. So this is a subjective calculation. Remember, in severe keratoconus, the visual axis may fall on the slope of the keratoconus, and therefore first determine the visual axis and then determine the optical zone. That is, draw a circle of 2.7 to 3 millimeters around this visual axis. Okay, which you have to do actually on the map. Take 12 points on this circle. Take corneal readings power of these 12 points and take an average, and use this in a whatever formula you want to use. So the in detail paper is available by Jared Dirani et al. Of Beirut Eye Hospital. So you can search for this. Then we go to conservative approaches. So in IOL power grade 3 and above, first we saw the two novel approaches. This is the slide. Okay, two-step approach and CEOs that I explained. And then now we go to conservative approaches. Why you require conservative approaches? Three reasons. Number one, patient is very happy with poor vision, undiagnosed keratoconus. Contact lens happy patient. That means keratoconus is known, but a contact lens with contact lens is having really good vision. And third is safety. The situation is so awkward that it is very difficult to decide what to do. In all these three, we must go for spherical IOL, and then contact lens if required. So what is the take-home message? Number one, let us start using the Retics classification, which gives visual quality and functionality to the keratoconus classification. Decide the toricity first, depending upon the central 3 millimeter of the topo. Then number three, if feasible, do some smoothing or regularization procedure to lower the Retics grade. Then for grade 1, 2, there are two approaches, EKR with Holiday and Barrett-Rucke with SSOCT with MPCA stands for measured postcorneal astigmatism. And for grade 3, there are two novel choices. Number one is smoothing procedure followed by grade 1 approach, and second approach is central effective optical zone. And for grade 3 and above, we go conservative, that means go for spherical power and contact lens if feasible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vavikar. That was a very detailed explanation. A few questions I had in mind. The first and the foremost was, what would be the role of ORA in such cases? Do you think ORA would have a better role in letting us know what sort of IOL should be implanted?
I think that ORA has a long way to go. See, basically, let us look at Barrett-Rucke. Now we are very sure that for post-refractive surgery, Barrett-Rucke works. Okay, but we are not sure that for post-corneal ectasia, where LASIK has been done and ectasia is there, and on top of that you have done C3R or topo-guided PRK. For all this, Barrett-Rucke works. Okay, so then we are thinking of Barrett-Rucke TK. Now, in case of ORA is somewhat behind in evolution as compared to Barrett-Rucke, and therefore I would first be sure that ORA works for normal IOL calculations, and then I'll go to complicated cases.
The regression formulas which you mentioned, is it available on any of the latest biometers, or one has to do it online?
No, the regression formula, when I said, I meant all those formulae with a refractive index of 1.3375.
Okay.
Because basically EKR is equivalent K reading. It is basically for derived for regression formulae, but it works best with the holiday 2. So all the regression formulae we can try, but I guess holiday 1 is available everywhere online.
That's right.
And
Thank
in
you,
the instruments.
Thank you, Dr. Vavikar. I now invite Dr. Shilpa Kodkani. Dr. Shilpa is a cataract and refractive surgeon. She is practicing in Belgaum. Recently, she has started a massive center, almost about 10,000 square feet center of with a multi-specialty eye clinic, and has had quite a few on-site seminars and conferences at her center itself. Her main interest is in pediatric cataracts, and she will let us know of how one chooses the right IOL, both the right IOL power and the right IOL in cases of pediatric cataracts for our pediatric patients. Dr. Shilpa, can you share your screen?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nitin, for that introduction. I'm honored. In fact, it's an honor to be here in the IC. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, your slides are visible.
Okay. So about biometry in pediatric cataracts, age and size, of course, does matter. The factors that influence the IOL power calculation are the age at which the surgery is done, knowing fully well that there is going to be a myopic shift. There are challenges in the axial length and keratometry measurements, the choice of the formula that you would ideally use in such cases, and of course the target refractor that you would prefer. Now, if you look at the growth of the eye at birth, the axial length is about 16.7 to 17 millimeters. At 1 year, there is a huge growth up to 20 to 21 millimeters. And after that, up to 15 years, there's a slow growth to 23.6 on an average. The mean K at birth is 51.2, but then it reduces over a period of time to 43.5. The lens power in the first year, it decreases by 10 diopters. And from the second to the 10th year, it decreases by about 3 to 4 diopters. So if you look at the axial length, there is a 3 to 4 millimeter of axial length elongation during the first year of life. And at the same time, the cornea and the crystalline lens are flattening. And
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, I think she has lost the connection. Nitin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Her slides are still visible. Yeah, but the slides are not progressing. So that means.
Shall I call her?
Yeah, I think so. I think she's logged off.
Next
No.
speaker.
I think you lost the can you see Shilpa, Nitin?
No, she is not on the. She's not logged in. She's not amongst the participants.
Shilpa, please log in again.
Okay, I do that.
Yeah. What we'll do is that we'll go ahead with the next talk. In the meantime, you try to log in again.
Yeah,
Okay.
connecting now.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So,
I'm connected. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah, please continue.
yeah, you can continue. You can share your screen and continue. Yeah, your slides are visible.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I lost connection. So the refractive error, there is no refractive error in spite of all these changes happening in the first year normally in any normal eye. But in an infantile cataract, what happens is the axial length elongation will continue, but the cornea flattens. But in aphakic children, there is no crystalline lens there, and that is why there is an increased myopic shift. Now, in aphakic eyes, the myopic shift can be corrected by reducing the power of the correcting contact lenses or the spectacles that you give post-operatively. In pseudophakic eyes, if the myopic shift is small, then it can be easily corrected with spectacles and contact lenses. But if there are larger myopic shifts over a period of time, of course, it will need an IOL exchange. Now, the challenge especially is in unilateral pseudophakia, where even if there is a large myopic shift, there is a significant anisometropia, which can lead to amblyopia. So this is another challenge that we face in all pediatric cataracts. So the question remains that the myopic shift is most possible when you are treating children below the age of 2, because the axial length is increasing drastically up to 1 year and from 1 to 2 years also. So what are the challenges? Now, one way of looking at it is up to the age of 2 years, you leave the child aphakic, and then around after the age of 2, you put a secondary IOL implant so that the child goes towards emetropia. But the challenge for those 2 years is that contact lens or hyperopic glasses are required to be worn, which is not easy. There is bound to be a lot of parental stress, compliance issues, and also the possibility of a dense amblyopia. So primary IOL implantation is a preferred method, and progressively nowadays people are going towards primary IOL implantation. But again, there are challenges. There is you have to do it under general anesthesia. It has to be in a supine position. The measurement of axial length, the applum, it is better to do an immersion technique, and your the Pregar shell has to be perpendicular to the retina and not the cornea. Now, inaccurate axial length measurements are very possible, and for each millimeter of difference in an adult you will get 3 to 4 diopters, whereas in children it can range from 4 to 14 diopters. Keratometry, handheld keratometry is required. Our regular methods are not possible, and you have to take repeated readings and make sure that all the readings are in range. So an average of the readings can be taken. Now, the next challenge is the choice of the formula. Now, there is no specific formula for children. Adult formulas only have been used. Now, ideally, you would think that a Hoffer Q is ideal for short axial lengths less than 22 millimeters, but it has been found in many studies that the mean prediction error is more in the Hoffer Q as compared to the other formulas, and there has been a wide range of studies that have been done. One of the Indian studies that have been done at Dr. Vasavda's place has shown that Holiday 2 and SRK-T show less of a mean prediction error as compared to the other formulas. Now, optical biometer and newer formulas, of course, for adult eyes are the gold standard today, but in children, it is not possible to do an optical biometry for the reasons that we just mentioned. Pediatric IOL calculators are nowadays available, wherein you feed in the data, it gives you the pseudophakic refraction of the child, and it will also predict the refractive change. But it was based on average eyes and refractive changes and did not entertain the outliners. So now the target postoperative refraction, it has been seen in a lot of studies, and one of the main studies done by NEAD, that you calculate as age plus the residual refraction is equal to 7. So if you look at this, at the age of 1, you should have a target of postoperative refraction of +6. And similarly, 2 + 5, 3 + 4. So it goes to 7. The sum of the two will be 7. The other method is that you use a percentage formula. That is 1 to 2 years, the IOL formula minus 20%, 2 to 4 years, formula minus 15%. So, and this is how you keep on reducing the percentage as the age advances. Now, there has been a huge study that has been done, that is the infant aphakia treatment study, which was a randomized clinical trial, which was multicentric. It compared infants from 1 to 6 months of age, wherein the child was left aphakic, and the correction was done with contact lenses. And the other group was a primary IOL implantation with the target post-op refraction as per the formula that I told you about. Now, up to 4 to 6 weeks, the target refraction was 8 diopters, and 6 weeks to 6 months, it was considered as 6 diopters. Another method of doing it is 2 to 4 years, the IOL powers should be the spheric, especially in the unilateral cataracts, the spherical equivalent of the fellow eye minus 1.25 diopters, and anything above 4 years, it should be match the spherical equivalent of the fellow eye. Now, there have been many other ways and methods that have been tried. One of them was the pediatric polypseudophakia or the pediatric piggyback IOLs, which was a surgical innovation done by Wilson et al. And involves in the bag placement of the IOL along with the second piggyback IOL. But honestly, doing this as a primary procedure and then removing that 20% later on, as it is, the eyeball is small, putting a lens, and it has been seen even in all the studies earlier that in a primary IOL implantation, the complications like secondary glaucoma, all these things are more as compared to keeping the child aphakic. So this is again, I would say, questionable. Another point is the amblyopia. Hyperopia interferes with amblyopia treatment. So at a smaller age group, it is easier to keep the child more towards emmetropia, and giving amblyopia treatment is easier with lower errors. Children with small hyperopia or myopia accept the amblyopia treatment better, and it is advisable to calculate a less of an undercorrection. So now there are two schools of thought. Aphakia up to 2 years, you keep the child aphakic and give contact lenses or aphakic corrections. Easier said than done. Compliance is a huge issue. But over a period of time, you will be able to give emmetropia at the right time, or go for the IOL implantation as a secondary procedure. Now, primary implantation with the less undercorrection, going more towards emmetropia initially, and then going on, which avoids amblyopia, and then over a period of time, if need be, you can do an IOL exchange or any other refractive procedure. So the take-home message would be target hyperopia to avoid myopic shifts, careful measurements to avoid errors in axial length and keratometry, IOL power calculation formulas, which have been derived from the adults, and more studies obviously are necessary. But whatever we have today, again, we are going more towards doing primary IOL implantations, doing closer to emmetropia in the smaller age group, and then tackling those children later on with contact lenses and with aphakic corrections, or even primary secondary IOL implantation being your procedure later on in age group, as compared to trying to fit contact lenses and aphakic correction in infants and babies. So this is the take home message.
Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. I had a question, and the question was, what is the earliest age that you would recommend IOL to be implanted? Means earliest age is in the earliest a neonate, a few days old. Again, you need to differentiate between the unilateral and bilateral
Yes,
cataract. So,
that is the main thing, that if it is unilateral, the minute you see it, you have to remove it, because any interruption in the visual axis is going to cause dense amblyopia. So whatever you do later on is not going to help much.
so my question was implantation of the IOL.
Yes, implantation of the IOL. The earlier studies said leave the child aphakic up to 2 years, but now progressively primary IOL implantation at the time of surgery itself is done. It is challenging because there are cases where you may see a 50 diopter is what your power is because of the axial length. And even with the undercorrection of say 10 diopters, getting a lens which is 40 diopters is difficult. And the second thing is it's going to be a very thick lens in that small eye. So I would say preferentially up to the age of 1 year, I would say leaving the child aphakic, because we know now that the huge axial length elongation occurs up to 1 year. And that is why I would say, if possible, up to 1 year, leave the child aphakic and try and do a little more of counseling and things like that for the children. It is a huge challenge, definitely.
Let us get Dr. Wrinkle's opinion. We have a pediatric ophthalmologist, Dr. Wrinkle Pusate, with us. Dr. Wrinkle, what's your opinion as far as implanting an IOL amongst neonates?
At our center, we are quite orthodox in this approach, and we prefer to leave the child aphakic. And a good aphakia is really easy to manage than posting the child again and again for surgeries. When you put up IOL, there might be tilting, there might be decentration, there might be thick PCO formation, but a good aphakia with good anterior vitrectomy really pays well in long term. And you really have to counsel the parents very hard. You have to insist again and again about the use of contact lenses and about the occlusion therapy here. So counseling makes
plays a huge role, definitely.
It has a huge role, sir.
So would you at your place do a primary PCCC for all pediatric patients?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
That helps a lot. That helps a lot.
I think in any pediatric cataract, you have to do a primary PCCC.
Now, does it make the secondary IOL implantation more challenging?
Exactly. I was going to ask that.
Not really, sir.
You are able to open space between the anterior and posterior capsule.
Yes. You have to separate the capsule, the anterior and posterior capsule later on. If not possible, you have to put it in sulcus. But in long run, having a posterior a PPC in place, it keeps the visual axis really very clear, and it immensely helps. Immensely helps, sir.
And the chances of developing a very thick PCO is a lot more in pediatric cases than in.
Yes,
so the visual axis being clear is very important.
but there are also chances of phimosis of the rhexis in pediatric cases, which are so common. So how difficult it would be to open up this rhexis later by putting in a secondary IOL?
It is. We don't deny that it is. We don't say it is a very easy thing to do. But in long run, sir, what happens is the critical period when the child's vision is developing. What we gain is maintenance of a very good clear axis, and even with aphakic glasses, we see drastic improvement rather than posting the patient again and again for surgeries and such things. Rather than having a bad pseudophakia, it really helps to it makes things easier actually.
So thank you, Dr. Rinkel, thank you, Dr. Shilpa. We now go ahead for lack of time. So what I would be discussing today is IOL power calculation in post-refractive
I
cases.
think we need to introduce Dr. Nitin first. He is a great cataract and refractive surgeon, always ahead of everything, has the latest equipment, and does a lot as far as cataract is concerned. Understanding what goes behind cataract surgery is very, very important, and that is what he does very well. So he's going to talk about obtaining or obsessed with 2020, which he is, I know. I talked to him a lot about trying to tweak our cases. IOL power calculation post-refractive surgery. Dr. Nitin Balakrishnan.
And may
Thank
I,
you.
Nitin and Shilpa, above all, is a very simple and a humble person.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Vavikar. Thank you, Dr. Shilpa. With the growing number of Generation X and Generation Y people who have undergone refractive surgery in their young age, and now reaching an age where they're developing cataracts, it's very important to know how to treat these patients. The most important challenge here is that these patients would expect nothing but a perfect vision because they're used to a perfect vision following refractive surgery. So what are the challenges one sees in cases of post-refractive cases? The first and the foremost challenge is the keratometric error. So what happens in case of myopic LASIK, there's a central flattening as opposed to a central steepening in hyperopic LASIK. And this causes an altered anterior to posterior corneal curvature ratio. Now, what happens in most of the modern day formulae? The formulae considers the relationship between the corneal power and the anterior chamber depth to predict the ELP, that is the effective lens position. So in cases of myopic LASIK, it will predict a shallow anterior chamber depth, thereby causing an anterior ELP, an underestimation of IOL power, and thus giving rise to an hyperopic surprise. On the other hand, in cases of a hyperopic LASIK, it will predict a deeper ACD, a posterior effective lens position, overestimation of the IOL power, and thus causing a myopic surprise. There are also instrument errors which gives rise to a wrong radius because most of the modern day keratometers would extrapolate the central corneal curvature by taking the reading from the paracentral measurement. We have challenges even in our post-RK patients, where what happens is the optical zone is very small, and therefore the corneal reading should be taken from the central 3 mm. Again, in cases of post-RK, you may have an irregular astigmatism, in which case it's very difficult to determine the true corneal power. Very often the Myers here are totally skewed and can hardly be seen. In cases of SMILE, you have a central steep area in the central 2 mm with a flatter periphery. But like can be seen here, in cases of SMILE, the procedure per se maintains the asphericity of the cornea, and peer-reviewed journals have shown a good agreement between ray tracing and any of the 7 formulae which are there in the ASPRS calculator, which I will speak about in some time. So how does one overcome these problems? The most common method is the choosing the right formula. So most of us are used to the Barrett True-K, which is something which everybody has been using, and it's available at the APASPRS website. And one needs to choose the Barrett True-K formula. Having done this, the most important thing is to choose the right IOL. The moment you choose the IOL which you want to implant, all the other the lens factor, the A constant, everything comes in on its own. One needs to put in the pre-LASIK and the post-LASIK refraction. What is important here is to mention that the post-LASIK refraction is not the current day refraction, because that would have changed due to the nuclear sclerosis, but it is the immediate post-LASIK refraction, maybe probably about a month after the LASIK. And therefore, the importance of telling all the refractive patients to save these records carefully. All these data are entered from the biometer, that is the axial length, the measured K1, K2, the optical ACD. All these are measured, are the data from the biometer. Having done this, when you choose the universal formula, one needs to choose whether it is a predicted PCA or a measured PCA. So if you are using a pentacam, you would choose a measured PCA. Whereas if you are using a if you're not using a pentacam, you would choose a predicted PCA. Once you do that, the Barrett true K formula will automatically give you what is the true K which it predicts, and the IOL formula and the IOL power which needs to be used. In the ASCRS calculator, which is available on the ASCRS website, one chooses whether it's a myopic or a hyperopic LASIK or a prior RK. Having done that, we need to choose the target refraction. Here, in cases of LASIK, the target refraction would be 0. In cases of an RK, it would be -1 for a 16 cut RK and a -2 for a 32 cut RK. The next data is the pre-LASIK data. Again, like in the Barrett calculator, you would feed in all the pre-LASIK data, the post-LASIK refraction, and the topography value depending on which instrument you use to do the topography of this particular patient. The biometry values are then entered. After that, one would get the power of the IOL. If a pre-LASIK data has been used, then all these formulae would show you what are the IOL power. And in case there is no pre-LASIK data used, then the formulae like the Wangkok-Maloney, the Shamas, the Haggis-L, and the Barrett true K by history would show in the IOL power. What is most important about the ASCRS calculator is that it gives you an average of all the formulae used, as well as the minimum and the maximum, which is the two ends of the power calculation. The next important thing which comes in cases of post-refractive IOL power is choosing the right IOL. And this is where we use our Demons to our advantage. It is important to check the Zernike's pyramid and to know what is the spherical aberration. Ideally, we should target a 0 spherical aberration to improve our visual quality. So let's get back to our basics. The cornea per se is a normal cornea per se is a prolate cornea with a Q value of -0.26. What happens in a post-myopic LASIK is that the cornea becomes oblate, thus giving rise to a positive Q value. It's therefore obvious that one needs to choose an IOL with a negative spherical aberration, which would be something like an AMO Technis or an Alcon IQ. I don't have any financial interest in any of these products which I'm mentioning. In cases of a post-hyperopic LASIK, here what happens is the cornea becomes more prolate, that the Q value becomes more negative. And obviously one needs to use an IOL with a positive spherical aberration, like an AMO Clariflex, which is now not available, or an Alcon SA6080. In cases of a RK, post-RK or a decentered ablation, it would be ideal to choose an IOL with a 0 spherical aberration, like a Sensar from an AMO or a B&L Acria. So these are some of the commercially available IOLs with positive, 0, and negative asphericity. So the positive ones would be used for previous hyperopic LASIK. The ones which have got a negative asphericity would be used for a well-centered previous myopic LASIK. And in cases of weak zonules, weak centered ablations, or large angle kappa, or in cases of post-RK, one would choose the IOL with a 0 asphericity. Now, it's important to know that these patients who undergone a post-refractive surgery demand, in fact, they really demand not only a perfect quantity of vision, but also a perfect quality of vision. So the next question which comes up is, would you or would you not do a multifocal IOL in these patients? Peer-reviewed journals have shown that multifocal IOLs can be done, but however, one needs to be careful and one needs to examine all the data properly. It's very important to see the pentacam maps of these patients and to do a proper Zernike analysis. The root mean square higher order of the higher order aberration should be checked in all these patients. And if the RMS value is more than 500 microns, this patient is not an ideal case for a multifocal IOL. As opposed to this particular ablation, where we have a well-centered ablation on pentacam, and the RMS value here is only a 0.337, and being less than 500 microns, one can go in for a multifocal IOL. In cases of a decentered ablation, one can also think of doing a topo-guided recentering of this retreatment of this patient, do a well-centered ablation, and then go ahead with a multifocal IOL or aspheric IOL as the patient demands. It's also important in all these cases where one is implanting a multifocal IOL to check the angle alpha, which is actually the angular distance between the optical axis and the visual axis. A normal angle alpha would be something between 0.3 to 0.5. And any cases where the angle alpha is more than 0.5 is not a favorable case for a multifocal IOL. So these are, again, literature has proved that it is important to check not only the angle alpha, but also the angle kappa. And in cases of a premium IOL, an angle alpha evaluation therefore becomes mandatory. So in conclusion, it's very important that in all cases of post-refractive surgery, one does a multifactorial approach. One needs to know the type of procedure done as a refractive procedure, whether it was a myopic LASIK or a hyperopic LASIK, because very often when a patient comes to you, he would just say that I had a number and I got it corrected, and would not know whether it was a myopic LASIK and or a hyperopic LASIK. Even when you're doing the calculation for these patients without a history method, it is mandatory to feed into the data whether it is a myopic or hyperopic LASIK, or else the entire IOL power would be wrong. The preoperative data and the immediate post-operative data following LASIK should be saved, and it's as cataract and refractive surgeons, it probably becomes our duty to see to it that the patient saves these data, and we also have a backup of this data on all our hard disks. Use of right instruments, the right biometer, a pentacam, an anerometer is very, very important in these cases. Use of the right formulae, and explaining to the patient that one may need more than a single procedure to achieve the target 2020, which is definitely possible to achieve with all these methodologies. Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention. Having discussed about the post-refractive IOL power calculation, I now invite, is Dr. Anand Parsati with us?
Yes, he's here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would suggest Dr. Vavikar could finish, then I would avoid the overlap.
Dr. Vavikar is already finished, Anand.
Okay, all right. Then I'm good.
So I invite Dr. Anand Parsarthi, who is a prolific corneal and refractive surgeon. He is a fellowship trained corneal surgeon from the Singapore National Eye Institute, as well as from LVP. And he's got a fantastic practice in the city of Chennai. And he would be talking to us about the various corneal conditions like post-keratoplasty or in cases of post-pterygium. How does one calculate and go ahead with the IOL power calculation? Over to you, Dr. Anand Parsarthi.
Am I clear? Is my slides visible?
Yeah, they are visible and you're audible.
All right. I've been asked to speak about this, and I'll probably a lot of it has been covered and by excellent talks earlier. So there may be a bit of overlap because I realize that the concepts are broadly the same. So of course, perfect corneal surgery no longer utopian, and getting 6x6 vision in a standard virgin cornea like this with a good preoperative workup works quite well. But there are some factors which need to be taken into account which affect the biometry. And for us, I think an important part is what is the power of the glasses or contact lenses they use, because I call this the optimization of vision by the patient itself. So they've already used and refined their own glasses. So if they're using a higher cylinder on the glasses or contact lenses, we really need to take that into account because it may compensate for the intralenticular astigmatism beyond the corneal level. There are some factors on the cornea, which is the excimer, PRK or LASIK, or an ocular surface, because these affect measurements. There are some factors in the cornea, like intracorneal rings, post-keratoconus, you have keratoplasty, and of course, some factors beyond the cornea, which is phakic lens, previous IOL, if you're doing a secondary IOL, and an effective lens position. Now, there are some critical factors which help to achieve perfect outcomes, which is getting 20 by 20. One is, of course, keratometry, which has been fairly well stressed on earlier, important in ecthesias and definitely post-refractive surgery. Axial length, extremely important, probably with the present optical biometers, repeatability in up to grade 3 cataracts is actually quite good. Now, the effective lens position is something that is a prediction. Remember that it is a prediction and it varies with patient systemic factors, sometimes changes with capsular phimosis, even capsular laxity can change the effective lens position. And that's something that is still a predictability. When you're doing IOL power calculation in irregular corneas, there is of course the refractive index error. There are errors in the corneal keratometry values. That now, which has been stressed down, is the change in relationship between the anterior and posterior curvatures of the cornea. And of course, there are inherent difficulties in various IOL formula that are actually being used. Myopic ablation, I think already fairly well covered, leading to an underestimation of the final IOL power because of the change in the keratometry. You can also end up using artificially lower keratometry values, and you also underestimate the effective lens position. Ectatic corneas, which Dr. Wavekar already covered, may have higher axial lengths, deeper anterior chambers, making the effective lens position even harder to estimate. Now, remember that steep keratometry values will overestimate the IOL power. And when we are looking formulas which work in keratoplasty eyes, it's important that you take into consideration axial lengths. So, formulas which consider axial length more include Hofferque and Haggis. Now, in ectatic corneas, remember that the keratometry values in ELP are overestimated. Hence, the IOL power shows a hyperopic shift. Almost always, of course, most of us have shifted to 3rd to 4th generation formulas and optical biometers. Remember, especially in post-corneal procedures, the optical biometry may be actually off-center. So the visual axis and something about alpha and kappa, which has already been mentioned, will change. And this is important even something like post-intracorneal ring segments or collagen cross-linking. Now, there are some pointers for keratometry. Remember that if the apex is off-center, it may not be in the visual axis. This means that the corneal keratometry measured in the apex may not be the K we have to use for calculation. But usually beyond 0.5 millimeters is when it really makes a difference. Less than 0.5 millimeters, it would not make a difference. Remember also, we have to decide the optical zone that we are going to use. There is no specific rule as of what I have read to decide how large the zone should be, but most people use about 4 millimeters. But remember, if you go for larger optical zone, this will overestimate the case because there would be an average of the K values. Now, the present accepted modality is to take the EKR values in the central 4.5 millimeters, obtained in the Pentacam or any other Scheimpflug image that you have. And this seems to be most accurate for in irregular corneas. You can take an average of that if this is used even for post-RK or for any other refractive surgery. Now, when you have a patient with a previous corneal graft, endothelial count in topography is of course mandatory. You may prefer to remove the sutures, but I have done patients like the patient on the right with continuous sutures, not having to actually remove the sutures if it's a very regular topography. Remember that most sutures can be kept in even for 1 year, though most corneal surgeons start removing them after 4 to 6 months to adjust the astigmatism. But the double continuous sutures, which I routinely do, I find that you can keep the sutures in even up to 2 years post-surgery. The second important part is in terms of sequential versus simultaneous surgery. Now, I have done more in a couple of patients in which we had doubts with respect to the effective lens position and the biometer values. We have done sequential. While we remove the cataract, leave the patient aphakic, get them back in a week's time, repeat the axial length measurements, and then go ahead and implant the lens. And that actually gives very, very good predictable results in these slightly unpredictable eyes, especially post-keratoplasty. Simultaneous surgery, if you have got, if your good axial length measurement correct, especially in early cataracts, this is a preferred option. Of course, surgical technique includes a limbal incision, avoiding the graft hole junction, a medical technique with Viscoat, and of course, slow motion picoparameters. Now, there is enough data now on normal virgin corneas. So we know that almost all machines really agree with each other in terms of the keratometry. There is no significant difference in all the three, even the advanced levels of optical biometers. And there is high comparability between K1, K2, astigmatism, between all the predominantly corneal based imaging lens machines. But in complex corneas, there is some difference. Diseases that alter the posterior corneal layer, example, ectasia, post-keratorefractive procedure, the Placido image that measures only the anterior surface may fall significantly short in measuring the true corneal power. And true corneal power is an important part when you actually calculate the IOL power, post-keratoplasty, or even something like post-corneal rings. Now, Scheimpflug based systems, the SIMK readings overestimate the total corneal power, especially in advanced keratoconus, and this discrepancy proves the source of the hyperopic refractive error after cataract surgery. So almost always you would need to take into account the posterior corneal power in most cases. Just for an example, and this is an ectatic cornea, which who came to us for cataract surgery, and he had some kind of laser ablation. We were not really sure 20 years back. And if you look at both the eyes, fairly symmetrical. Now, when you look at the K readings, and we did almost across 4 machines just to make sure we're not missing anything. We did the autokeratometry, we did the SIMK, IOL master, pentacam, and posterior curvature. And you can make out that there is almost about half a diopter, 1 diopter difference between different machines. But the Cirrus and the pentacam tend to agree because they use predominantly the same technology. If you compare the left and right eyes, of course, the IOL masters in some very extreme cases were not actually giving us correct results. So when you compare the left and right eyes, there is an agreement between the Cirrus and the pentacam, and then we decided that we would actually use that as the base for the keratometry. If you look at other measurements, antechamber depth, you look at IOL master variability, you have lens thickness variability. Axial length is something that we decide to go with the optical biometer. So your source of the keratometer is always going to be Scheimpflug based imaging. A source of the axial length needs to be optical biometers. And when you look at powers, and there is such a lot, and we did all this just as an exercise. We did the Barrett Truquet, we used the IOL master, we used the Hollywood Toric, we used the ASC online, Sharma's, Hagizel, the Hill Pentacam, the Barrett Truquet, even the ASC average IOL power. And once we put all of this together, just to make sure, just as an exercise, what we would get, this was the final conclusion when we looked at all the combinations, where we looked at effective corneal power, predicted corneal astigmatism, toric cannula. We used the universal toric. We decided that final, you really, if you want to look at the most important slide, I would put it as this, where you look at the EKR, you measure the measured posterior corneal astigmatism, you take the toric K, you take the axial length from the IOL master or any optical biometer, and then decide. And for that patient, we put in slightly different powers. And of course, we optimize the second eye based on the first eye results. So for me, EKR, measured corneal astigmatism, and the Barrett toric is probably the best combination available. This is just a short video on a customized toric and IOL post-keratoplasty, and he had a mature cataract. In this, we have, of course, almost removed all the ends. He's got a fairly mature cataract. In these patients, this was a fairly old video, almost about 4 years old. But if I had to do him again, I would probably do a sequential. Now, just a pointer, and this is, of course, not exactly related, but in terms of using the technique, remember, a lot of them post-therapeutic keratoplasty tend to have a membrane. So we actually just wanted to excise the membrane. You can see the pigments on the anterior capsule, and you may not actually perfectly get a perfect round rhexis in these patients. This is very soft cataract. We basically did the rhexis in 2 parts, did the toric marking, and then basically inserted the IOL as per axis. Of course, here we had a customized toric from Zeiss, and it worked actually quite well. Now, the advantage with the smaller rhexis, of course, it is actually very, very stable. And the principles in terms of measurements, here we, at that time, usually had to have only 1 measurement. So it's not that it's critical, but it's an important part of getting the posterior corneal curvatures. This is also just to mention that if you're lucky, you can get a post-RK patient with a fairly regular astigmatism, and we actually did a multifocal toric in these lenses. So if you follow these processes, I think it actually gives quite good results. Of course, post-operatively, for this patient, The hospital were happy with the income, and I was happy with the outcome. Just the last couple of slides. To take home, there's no single formula that is reliable. Most repeatable values have to be considered. So if you have the access, and we actually send the patient to multiple centers to get that, the second eye surgical data may be calculated based on the post-op refraction of the first eye, in case there is bilateral need for surgery. I would end. In terms of the keratoplasty, I think I've covered, because pterygium was a tricky part, and if there's any points for discussion, we can take it up, Nitin. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Anand. That was a very detailed discussion. You mentioned about going in for a multifocal IOL in cases of post-RK with the regular astigmatism. My only fear in these cases would be, what about the change in refraction which keeps occurring over a period of time in these patients? You know, could you explain this to the patient right at the beginning?
That's a very important point, Nitin. What I didn't actually mention was, if you look at the OCT of these patients, we look at the depth of the incision. If it's less than 80%, remember all our behaves almost like a normal cornea. Remember that if it's a 32 cut RK or a 16 cut RK, which I'm sure you see a lot more, it may not be that straightforward.
Dr. Anand.
Go ahead, Dr. Vavekar.
Dr. Anand, we missed the word.
Doctor, are you facing any technical problems?
I cannot hear Dr. Vavekar speak.
Dr. Vavekar, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, Dr. Anand, can you hear me now? Once you said most of the RK cuts are 80%, after that we lost 2-3 lines, which are very important. Will you please repeat that?
Majority, all RK cuts are not the same. That was what I'm saying. In a 8 cut RK, if you got a 60%, 70% depth of the RK, those corneas would not behave as unpredictability as a 32 cut or a 16 cut RK, where the cuts are 80 to 90%. My factor is, of course, do an OCT across the cuts. If you have epithelial plugs, which may indicate a bit of a perforation, those corneas I would be a lot more careful. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, very interesting point, but thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Anand. I now call upon Dr. Rinkle Fusate. Dr. Rinkle Fusate is a fellowship-trained pediatric ophthalmology from Arvind Eye Hospital, Coimbatore. She has been managing the cornea, the cataract and the refractive work with Dr. Prashant Bawankule at Sarakshi Netralaya, Nagpur, and would be talking to us about IOL power calculation in complicated cases, like in cases of posterior staphyloma, in cases of post-detachment cases. And I now invite Dr. Rinkle to share her screen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those kind words. And it's really an honor to share screen with you all stalwarts here. I'll be starting with my presentation. So even a patient who has posterior segment disorder, he does deserve a good refractive outcome after cataract surgery. Major challenges in patients with posterior segment diseases are many, and most important amongst them are the posterior staphyloma, the changing progressive axial length, VR surgery induced changes, and poor vision. A VR surgery itself induces changes in ocular milieu right from the ocular surface to the vitreous content. And after VR surgery, there is increase in axial length, there is shallowing of AC sometimes the haze in the media increases, the ERM or the recurrent RD associated with VR can lead to underestimation of axial length, and silicone oil poses a challenge due to the velocity attenuation. Even in these cases, given a choice, an optical biometry would be the method of choice here, but it is not always practically feasible. So main challenge lies not in the IL calculation. The challenge is about the calculation of axial length in these patients. The tear film may be disturbed in cases like post-scleral buckle, which leads to unreliable K readings, and it can be easily overcome by use of lubricants. In high myopia, the progressive change in the myopic refraction poses a challenge. Also, we should always keep in mind that the refractive prediction errors of different formulas, it decreases, the prediction power decreases as the axial length increases. Even in high myope, wherever is possible, an optical scan would be better than the acoustic scan. And if there are any confusions, you should always aim for an error towards the myopic side. And ULIP constants fare better than the constants given by the manufacturers, and these are available online free. Myopia poses challenge, and LASIK, it further complicates the biometric challenges because of the K reading changes. And as has been already discussed, patients should be thoroughly counseled about possible need for enhancement in form of surface ablation or sometimes an IOL exchange in such patients. RK, as has been already discussed, it has K readings change, effective lens position is difficult to calculate, and there is hyperopic shift over time. In cases of retinal detachment with macula on and cataract, optical biometry would be still a preferable thing because the macula is on and you can get those scans easily. If not, B-scan guided scan should be way to go. And phaco-vitrectomy also itself induces myopia because of these following mechanisms. In cases of macula off retinal detachments, the optical scan is not easy to get because the macula is off. So you have to rely on the B scan, a combined AB scan biometry here. And you should always try to check it with the previous refraction, check your axial length assessment with previous refraction, and also check it with the other eye. One option would be to use optical biometry with user-adjusted axial length, where manually the point is taken as the posterior spike, which the anterior spike is because of the detached retina. So go for the posterior spike here. Combined AB scan biometry is very useful in cases of detached macula as well as in staphyloma. So how do you do this AB scan biometry combined? You take a horizontal axial scan on B scan, put your A scan vector on the machine, and then pass the vector through the center of the cornea and the lens and to the point just beneath the optic nerve void here. This is just to show that in case of posterior staphyloma, how little change in the reference point creates very large differences in the axial length, and this might reflect in the IL power calculation later. Contact with silicone eye oil induces a cataract in almost 60 to 100% of cases over 2 weeks to 2 years. Optical biometry, wherever it is possible, should be done in these cases, and it definitely gives good results. And optical biometer has a inherent SO mode in the software. If not available, then A scan or combined AB scan can be done. On A scan, fewer machines do have SO mode, but if you do not have SO mode, what you have to do is you measure the axial length on your scan machine, you multiply it with the conversion factor of 0.71 if you have used a 1300 centistokes of silicone oil, and that gives you a calculated axial length. If you have used 1000 centistokes, multiply it by 0.64. Just to show how to change the velocity on the A scan, you change the velocity from 1550, which is a standard put over there, 987 for 1000 centistokes of silicone oil and 1133 for 1300 centistokes of silicone oil. This is on B scan, you measure the axial length and then you change the medium of tissue to silicone oil and the machine gives you the calculation. If not, use the formula that we have previously discussed. Using the contralateral eye for axial length or intra-op biometry is also one option. And two, you should always be open to two-step approach where you can put the IOL as a secondary procedure. This study shows in silicon filled eyes, especially with axial length more than 23.63, IOL master, the lens staff fares better over the IOL master. It is presumed that the silicone oil fills the whole globe, which is not always a practical situation. It can be partially filled, in which case, in supine position, there is a large void in front of macula. But in sitting up position, only a small cup of fluid is present. So a sitting up position should be preferred. Also, this is again CT guided axial length. Buccal induces myopic shifts and do not do biometry before 3 months, and it takes 3 months to stabilize. In macular pathologies, macular thickening causes underestimation, go for optical biometry. Few cases we would like to discuss. This is a one-eyed patient with posterior staphyloma. So challenge is one eye, no other eye for comparison. A scan shows error, optical scan, B scan show good readings, and we go ahead with the calculation here. This second patient had RK marks apart from posterior staphyloma, so you have to use a topographic guided K readings to calculate IOL power. This patient has posterior staphyloma with aphakia. Always use, try to remember to put your aphakic modes on for this patient. This patient had RK and had undergone LASIK and was having a maculoschissis in his left eye. So watch out for the K readings, and if their axial lengths are underestimated, you have to cross-check it with all modalities. This patient had a partial retinal detachment with macula on, and as we already discussed, an optical scan helps a lot here. On B scan, you might sometimes err because of the detached macular spike. This patient had a total retinal detachment in one eye and the other eye was silicon filled. So A scan underestimated, no optical scan was available, only K readings were available. Only we could only rely on the B scan readings here. This patient, it was a one-eyed patient with iris coloboma and retinochoroidal coloboma involving the macula and nystagmus. So we cross-checked with all modalities, and the power was calculated. And as the white to white was very small, you should go for customized IOLs in such cases. Similarly, this another case who was having a severe microcornea in right eye as compared to the left eye. Right eye also had a retinochoroidal coloboma with macular involvement. Surprisingly, axial length was more in the right eye than the left eye. So we confirmed it on B scan also. And now watch out for the very flat K readings, very shallow AC and white to white as compared to the left eye. And the axial length is comparatively more in the right eye. So this denotes the relative anterior microphthalmos here, and the left eye was biometrically absolutely normal. This patient here, we have the other good eye for comparison. It is a esophageal eye. So important thing is to measure the your calculations in SO-field mode in all the machines. Similarly, this is a aphakia with SO-field globe. AC depth cannot be calculated, and always remember to put both aphakic as well as silicon mode on here. This patient, apart from having aphakia and SO-field eye, had a very dense PCO. So optical scan was not available, and even the A scan could not help. You only have to rely on a B scan, which is also with SO adjustment done. If not, if you are not very sure about your calculations, then you should go for it. Another thing, another patient who was having myopic strabismus fixus. Myopic strabismus fixus makes it difficult to align the scans, and you only have the B scan to rely on, that to a SO field with SO conversion. So in nutshell, there is no single machine of choice. You have to customize for every patient, cross-check with all the modalities available with you, and correlate your findings clinically as well as with the other eye, and counsel the patients very well for refractive surprises. This is a small flowchart that we have devised for our biometric cubicle. You may write to us if you want to use them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wrinkle. That was a real detailed talk which you gave, and in fact, I should credit you for all the cases, the real life cases which you presented, and that was really lucid. So, do any of our panelists want to add something more to this particular aspect? Dr. Vavikar, Dr. Anand?
Dr. Wrinkle, I would like to ask you, if you have a patient with who's one-eyed and has a cataract as well as a detached retina, how will you do the biometry, and what would you do in such a case?
Ma'am, usually with cataracts, the optical scan is usually out of question. In very rare cases, can you get that? And the patient is already having a detached retina. So only one option left here would be a B-scan guided A-scan. And as there is no other eye for comparison, you have to rely on like your B-scan guided readings only. Because being a one-eyed patient, you really don't want to go for a two-step procedure, because it will be more.
But even on the B scan, you would have a detached retina there.
Yes, ma'am. But on B scan, you neglect the anterior spike. Like on B scan, you can directly do it on the scan itself. You can measure directly on the retina on scan.
All right.
You neglect the anterior spike.
So you neglect the detached retina and go more towards the choroidal spike.
Yes, ma'am. The RP choroid, that level you target.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Vavikar.
Dr. Wrinkle, one-eyed patient, and because of the cataract, you are not able to see whether the retinal detachment is, acute or sudden, or it has been chronic. So, don't you think it will be better the way Dr. Anand expressed, that this time you go ahead with silicone oil only and leave the patient?
Yes, sir. Yes, definitely. You have to keep that option open, because sometimes it is on table that you decide whether you want to put the silicone oil or not. Especially in cases having TRDs, the diabetic patients, they sometimes land up with such situation, a dense cataract and a TRD behind. In such cases, you have to go for two-step procedure.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Nitin, I would like to ask you a question. When you have a patient post LASIK and you don't have pre-op data, obviously we are going to the Barrett formula, which has no previous history. But if you have a huge minimum and a maximum, there's a huge difference between the two. What do you do?
That would be available on the ASCRS calculator, where without the history, you can, on the ASCRS calculator, you get the average.
On that calculator.
If there is a huge difference between the three, then obviously I'm going to go in for the average.
The average also shows a minimum, like now, say, for example, it would show you a minimum being 11 and a maximum being 18. Something like that.
Usually,
Shekhar.
Usually what I've seen, even in the worst RK cases, the difference between maximum and minimum is never beyond 4 diopters. Yes. Okay. And suppose 11 and 15 is the thing, and so 13 is the average. Then I will see where is Barrett-Truquet. And suppose Barrett-Truquet is 14, so I'll go somewhere between 13 and 15. I will take a biased average, biased towards Barrett-Truquet. So if it is 11, 15, average is 13, but Barrett-Truquet is saying 14, I will go for say 13.5, something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would probably rely more towards Barrett-Truquet, but also consider the other formulae. So do we have any other questions? The hall coordinators, can you tell us whether there are any other questions from the from the audience?
Sir, we have no questions from the audience as of now. So we still have 3-4 minutes. If you would still like to discuss anything, you can go ahead with that.
I would like to just take maybe a take-home point from Dr. Mavikar because I missed his presentation. So 5 points from your side, please.
So point number one is that for corneal ectasia, we start using Retics classification, which is a new classification. Which previous keratoconus classifications are basically based only on topography, whereas Retics classification, RETSCS, it is based on functionality. And on Retics, basically you divide the groups into two. Grade 1 and 2, they are milder keratoconus. 3, 4, and 4 plus are severe keratoconus. In any of them, first, if it is possible, do a regularized smoothing procedure, either by topo-guided PRK or by Intacs, and wait for 3 months. Okay, that is one, and then go for this. And there are 3 methods. Number 1 is EKR with holiday 1 or holiday 2. Number 2 is Barrett-Truquet with measured posterior corneal aneurysm. And third is ray tracing. And ray tracing, the enough peer-reviewed literature is not available. So I would discount that. So we are left with Barrett-Truquet or Barrett-Truquet TK, EKR with holiday. And when it is a severe keratoconus, it is like if the you can either take a novel approach, that means smoothing, and hopefully the grade comes down, you could go the previous way, or go for a safety approach, that means leave the patient, put a spherical IOL and give him contact lens.
So thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask the question to any of the panelists that Barrett has option of using 2 refractive indices. One is 1.337, other is 1.332. So most of the times we are using 1.337. Anybody knows when to use 1.332?
Sir, as far as my knowledge goes, it is as per the IOL biometer, you can actually change the refractive index. That option is there sometimes in toric IOLs and in the biometer. But when is what, I'm not really sure. Dr. Nitin?
No, even I'm not aware of that exact.
Okay.
Okay, since there are no further questions, I think we will end this session here. I'd like to thank all the panelists, Dr. Shilpa Kodkani, Dr. Wrinkle, Dr. Mavikar, Dr. Anand Parthasarathy, for having contributed to this particular IC and given us good take-home messages. Thank you, and thank you again, Dr. Partha Biswas and the scientific committee of the All India Association, All India AIOL. Thank you.
So even I like to grab this opportunity to thank everybody, to all the doctors for your virtual time presence here. Thank you, Dr. Nitin, to conduct the entire session. I hope you all had a great virtual time and a lot of learnings from this session. Thank you for being